So I'm going to start a presentation tonight. Oh, hey, I see some young fans out there. I see some people I know and some people I don't, but I got a soft spot for the youngest ones for sure. Thanks for bringing them. So I'm going to share my screen because it's really great to see you at my favorite spot with the brilliant co-hosts and attendees who make my Wednesday every Wednesday and honor the great time that we've had. So I'm going to make a journey through some of my favorite presentations and takeaways from personal projects, connections with mentors I admire, and just talk about our practice. Can you see my screen? So what does it mean to practice? Why do we do it? How do we create safe spaces? What allows us to feel safe? So this picture is
here's a summary of what I found. Taking part in social events or group exercise, or even going for a walk.
Thank you to my tech for telling me what it means, but I'm going to help by referencing this image, which is a book about safe dance practice, which is actually dance medicine and dance science. And if you look at this image, everyone's dancing freely, but they're all dancing together. So no one's running into each other, and it's happening in harmony, but it's happening with experts feeling free. So I like that as an inspirational moment for how we can think about our practice. So the next thing I like to think about when I practice is who inspired me and how did they do it and how can I pass that on? So up in the upper right is my professional practice professor, David Hinson from Temple University in Philly. He introduced me to volunteering and Habitat for Humanity and has since moved to Auburn, where he elevates the work of his new students who become professors and who in turn elevate their students. And it's because of his mentorship that I reconnected with him. And he shared his current work with rural studios and then the Passive House Accelerator community. So sooner or later tonight, we'll drop a link in the chat so you can rewatch this one, because this was one of the first ones that made us all cry. Because they talked about educating citizen architects and working across private and public partnerships in order to form equitable housing access for everyone in their community and learn about the trades and design and build in the process. So here's the front porch initiative is the other name that it's known under, but they built $20,000 homes and they mass produced them themselves. So they are from Auburn University and they're surveying the existing substandard housing. They're meeting the residents. And they're building the sawhorses, the town, the firehouse, and the community center, all within a couple hours of the university. But the key here is the industry of home building with the goal of home ownership for underserved communities. And one lesson that they taught us is the kind of problem that you cannot solve unless you are, as they call it, fiercely place-based. So something they realized in building homes that were going to be owned by those who lived in them, even though they were affordable, they weren't going to be rented, they were going to be owned. They couldn't get a mortgage without fire insurance, and they couldn't get fire insurance without a firehouse. So they designed and built the firehouse too. And then they also realized that the kids who were going to live in the houses did not have access to high-speed Wi-Fi. And so they rehabbed a local building to become the library. And now all of them have access to high-speed Wi-Fi for their schoolwork, for their research, for their career building. And this is a project that I got to work on. And last year we were about halfway through this project. This is a really killer video. I can show it to you on my website sometime. But basically, when this comes out of the ground, you're looking at the footprint. You get to see all of the parts and pieces down to every single stud. And I did this in tandem with Holzram, as I mentioned, and also with the team at Revision Architecture, among many other talented people. But we decided to prefab everything that we could, which in a nutshell came down to site sourcing and early sequencing for all of the parts across all of the teams, including the contractors and the fabricators. So we fabricated structural slabs, interior walls, exterior walls. We pre-installed windows, floor plates, roofs, and finished ceilings. And we did it primarily because we had resiliency goals for low embodied carbon, monitoring, backup power, stormwater infiltration, and an equitable rental plan for a planned renovation and a change of occupants at the 20-year mark, which meant to be fully resilient with the land, the water, and the community. We had to coordinate those items that could only happen on site. So we had to be fiercely place-based as well. And in tandem with being place-based and doing prefab, since sometimes those don't match on site, you've really got to look at all of your shop drawings and do those drawings together in a way where you feel safe, where you do that dance together and you bring your experts together in a way that they share in a robust fashion. So this is the design build workflow that we put together after we decided to prefab, because we decided a little bit late. So anyone who's considering prefabbing, everything in red on this list on the left was special to prefab. And there were a couple items that moved in our workflow that we weren't prepared for because it was our first time. So I really want to share that with people who want to prefab. Get started early, build your team early, get your metrics set so you can freeze your geometry, so you can order your windows early and you can do your contracts early, because then you can get in line with a prefabber early. And whether that prefabber is your friend who has a warehouse up the street and is going to build indoors, or if it's someone as sophisticated as a Blueprint Robotics or someone larger, or someone in the middle who's growing from one of those spaces to the other. We all know who those heroes are, especially those who are doing it in the prefab passive house space. So the benefits of prefab are over there in green, and the challenges of the project weren't germane to prefab or passive house, but just the project itself. It was a complex project. But then the other thing I want to share with everybody is that there's a checklist that anyone can use. And this is my checklist challenge to everybody. If you use this, you have to add to it, and then you have to reshare it, okay? So screenshot it, take it away. The top three are the three things that I like to think about first with a client. Determine the renewable energy options. What can we use? Are we in total shade or can we use solar? And then the design goals for metrics, materials, monitoring, and resiliency. Set those goals early. And when those goals are set, use certification to keep them in place. And then define the narrative that your team is going to use to control that design. Because during any project, value engineering is real, scope creep is real, and things get pushed aside and watered down or greenwashed, which is the worst word in the human language now. So set that narrative and defend it. Learn how to defend it. Practice your talking points. So one of my favorite things when you send out your RFPs is to require community braiding. So this immediately sets up a place-based initiative. You get one-to-one expert and community mentee relationship. And you make that part of the requirements for applying to put in a proposal. And then you have standing virtual site meetings with that mentor and expert. Either they can have them amongst themselves or with you, however they want to work it. That's the part where you let them be free, feel safe, and dance together and learn from each other. In analyzing design iterations, always great to look at your site, keep it simple, manage your water, your heating, cooling, and shading, your length of plumbing runs, your accessibility. Determine your inboard versus outboard insulation. That's all relative to climate. And ballpark your wall thickness. So now you can do a really free model because you've got your wall thickness, you understand what your requirements are, and now you can start to play with your form. Keep it simple, but get that exposure right, get that shading right, get that free shading and cooling in the summer, that free heat in the winter. Then verify your structural strategies so you stay thermal bridge free. Define your materials, so your air, water, fire, toxicity, longevity, where it's coming from, its origin, whether they're compatible. Make sure they're going to work together, and ask for mock-ups and adhesion tests. Create your energy model, do your iterations, and ballpark your energy usage. Once you have that, then you can set your renewable energy strategy, and you can say, I've got this many kilowatts per year per person. So because I built a passive house, I only need this much solar. Where are we going to put it? And if we're going to, shelter in place, are we going to do it in the whole house? Are we going to make a little ADU area where everything's lit up there when the power's out? And so maybe our battery and our solar only have to take care of that little part instead of the whole house. Now we've got plans for resiliency. And by starting with passive house, you've already got plans, because your envelope is going to let the temperature creep for like a week almost in any kind of power outage, at least in my climate. So you set your envelope, your systems, and your resilience strategy, clash detect. You get someone great like Holzram to do a beautiful model for you and help you with that clash detection. And then you finalize that design. You include your penetration schedule, your mock-ups with your adhesion tests. You, if you can, minimize the operable windows, because we know we want them everywhere we can get them, and we need them for egress and safety, but they don't all have to be operable, and they're expensive. So in keeping it affordable, that's a nice little thing to go over with your team. Run your future conduit to the roof for your solar, even if you're not going to put it in now. And also to your neighbors for community solar, because that's coming. So think ahead. And wire to your EV charging stations, whether you're going to put them in now or not. Make sure that there's a good plate there, so when they go in, it's an easy install. And make sure you have a single integrated network, so that you not only have monitoring for your energy use, but that you've got all the smart home features that homeowners are all anticipating now. So this is where we left off 2 years ago when it snowed, and it was our proof of concept. So this is exactly what you want a passive house to look like after you pass the blower door tests and the tenants move in on time and you hit all your deadlines. The snow allows it to look just like a passive house should. You don't see any roof rafters in there. And then this past March, Silver Green received FIAS Plus 2018 and Source Zero certification, which was great because Source Zero was released while we were in construction. And we could only take advantage of it and get that extra certification because we looked ahead and we said, we're not going to have any fossil fuels on site. We were solar ready. We sourced all our energy from renewables. And by the close of this year, all the site work and the rain garden will be in place. And the wetlands and the properties downstream will be fully protected. So this is the end of the story for Silver Green, but there is one problem here, and that is that this is a real legacy project. And it's not exactly affordable. It's a little bit more extravagant, right? And so how do we take the lessons that we've learned from this project, which had its community in mind, had resiliency in mind, toxicity in mind, and apply it to a typical home, a typical size, and a typical budget? And in thinking about that, scaling up prefab homes in other places with other budgets is getting harder every day, right? It's not only hard to build houses, it's even harder to own them. So in 2020 across the US, we built less than a fifth of the housing we did in the 70s and 80s. And the lack of supply and the increasing demand created a feeding frenzy, not only due to COVID, but due to the quality of the investment. So that $60 billion housing grab by Wall Street made it more about renting the American dream than owning the American dream. And in fact, as an investment, home ownership is that #1 path to generational wealth. So when we talk about affordability and marginalized communities, they're going to benefit the least when it becomes the most challenging to own a home. And yet they're the ones who benefit the most when you give them a passive house, because now they don't have the utility bills hanging over their heads with the prices that can double and triple without warning, and make it, the difference between paying the rent, paying the electric bill, getting to work. So it's one of the greatest inequities we face as a nation. And according to Freddie Mac, the shortage is primarily driven by the long declines in construction. So we tried prefab for a couple different projects since Silver Green, and we even had an 8-unit multifamily project in the city that wasn't big enough for some of the big warehouse prefabbers. And so I think looking at prefab on a smaller scale, or even in a larger space that can be delivered on a smaller scale, on a more local radius, is a way to introduce inclusivity and equitability and reduce the exclusivity that some of the larger companies now have to do because their bottom line is very different than where they started. So what can single family learn from multifamily? How do we get those big projects into the small projects? So these are lessons from Philly's Great Eight, and who gives a QAP, a QAP? That was the qualified allocation plan for incentivizing passive house that happened in Philly in 2015. And 7 projects were completed, 8 were proposed. And you can see on the right the total cost comparison between the passive house and non-passive house projects. At $111 a square foot, I think we can call that affordable. So what made it so affordable? A lot of that was experienced then and is still experienced today. So experience pays. And that's one of the reasons that you want to pair your experts with your novices. You want to pass on that knowledge and make sure you're getting the benefit in your project of the expert who can deliver on time, not make mistakes or missteps, help lead the team with confidence, and a lot of projects under their belt where they've seen a lot of different conditions, and yet at the same time pass that on to someone in the community who's actually going to live there, work there, and practice there. So the cost of multifamily buildings built to the FIA standard are on the bottom, and the differential between the zero energy buildings and code buildings are on the top. So not a lot of incremental cost there. Anyone can use these slides. These are all for the use of anybody who wants to share them with their local administrators and their local code officials. So this is a public-private partnership that works very well between the Inflation Reduction Act and FIAS and the National Alliance of Community Economic Development Associations. So this is an idea for a public-private partnership that can, in essence, have an effect on single-family homes, duplexes, and townhomes in a way that if we don't prefab and if we don't use our prescriptive methods and our tools and our experience, we can't take advantage of. And this is a great slide that came out of the FIAS conference for some of the cost benefits that we don't think about. Some are the heat-related illnesses that occur, which are showing up on these slides. And then also there were slides for noise-related illnesses. So when we talk about urban projects or projects that are near trains or places that make it very hard to live if you don't have the quiet of a passive house, those illnesses have costs related to them, and they have real quality of life impacts related to them. And then another piece that we can learn from looking at passive house at scale and larger impacts is how to build with sustainable materials. So this was a project at FIAS in New Haven, Connecticut for a mass timber and passive house integrated design. So the team is up there on the right, and Jeff Spiritos, who's been one of our attendees many times, was part of the presentation team for this. And it's just a brilliant project. I invite you to learn more about that. But in doing these private and public local prefabs, this is an equation that we talk a lot about, which is a prescriptive core standard taking out all of the non-renewable energy sources, looking at prefab in smaller units, and then getting to a low carbon footprint because we've added passive house, we've taken away fossil fuels, and we've kept our radius tight to the site. So on the bottom, you can see the form is simple and the exposure is thought about. We use our calculators, our manuals. You can do this with fee as well as FIAS. Get your envelope in line with inboard versus outboard percentages of insulation. Check that source of energy and then go for your certifications. And those will hold your team and their feet to the fire the whole way through the project. So when we talk about the benefits of prefab, we're also talking about what it can do for passive house that passive house doesn't do alone. So passive house is what takes the load off operational energy, which is what we're seeing in the green boxes here. This is a life cycle analysis of a low energy building. And the A1 through A3 all the way to D are those stages and modules for measuring the carbon emissions of a project from cradle to grave, right? But the red box is cradle to gate. And 50%, if you look at the bottom there, 50% of our goals for 2035 and 2050 happen in that space. And that's why everyone is talking about upfront carbon. Everyone is talking about embodied carbon. And that's where prefab really has a lot of advantages. So how does it work? If you look at the Advancing Net Zero project, that upfront carbon stat I gave you, there's your source for that. But on the right, if you look at the Journal of Building Engineering, and they compare life cycle impacts of alternative structural materials and other materials, prefab has lower environmental impacts, uses less materials, creates a fraction of the waste, and on average takes half the time to be built. Plus, if you do this in a local way, you're creating jobs in the local economy and you're keeping the money in the local economy and you're benefiting the community as well. So what are the new control layers? The new control layers are how to control that narrative. So we used passive house as our goal. We used living building as our guide, and the red list and the declare label and any kind of iterations we could for equity and health and beauty as our guide. And then we used workforce development and local prefab as our goal. And when we prefabbed, we used Blueprint Robotics, but we paired them with a local builder who had never done passive house before, who had never prefabbed before, who was skeptical, and who did a fantastic job coordinating everything from beginning to end. He is an excellent builder, and that's just what excellent builders do. And because he did this, everyone in his context, all of his subs, learned the process along with him. And he gave tours to the school in the community and shared the process with them as well. So these not only anticipate what's going to happen in the community, but they anticipate future codes, future users, and future tech. So here's a nice tool I like that PrePHab provides. It's called Kaleidoscope. If you don't have it in your budget to do a carbon analysis or an emissions analysis on your design or your materials, or you don't know what to buy, reach out to your contacts here, reach out to your contacts in your local networks, your green building communities, your green product manufacturers or supply warehouses where you find your products, and then go to this site. These are 4 really simple categories you can use to flesh out your products in a whole new light. It's very simple and you can use it very quickly. So here are some trends. In 2016, prefab houses were the holy grail. So why aren't there more of them? Well, they're growing, right? So in 2022, there was a 5.5 increase and the technology was coming fast. And now the projection is 6.4 to 7.2 by 2026. So that's just a couple of years that prefab is really going to take off. So even if you're a local designer like I am, I'm a sole proprietor. I build my teams. I count on my teams. But if I don't integrate prefab into my workflow, there's a chance that I might be left out of my own local market because it has so many advantages. So learning how to do it, figuring out who's good at it, and how you can get there locally is something to start thinking about now. Because if we don't, someone else is going to prefab, and they're not going to know about Passive House like you do. And they're going to deliver something that might look like this. You know, how big will it be? How green will it be? And will they deliver equity? Where does this come from? Where is it going? Does it even know what it's going to look like on its site and where north is? And how do we rethink prefab together before it gets too big? So I love this, this image. It's based off an Indian proverb about the blind man and the elephant. And it reminds me always of what happens when we work in our silos. So feel free to borrow this as well. And then think about how you can put prefab in its place. So your materials, your services, and your distances. This from the Living Building Challenge on the left will tell you where to get your ideas from, your renewable energy, all the way down to your heavy materials. And it starts to create circumferences for you on how far you should go to source these. And then when you simplify and prefab the envelope, you can get a minimum of 75% of the construction materials from 5,000 kilometers of the project site. And then if you make friendly components and a kit of parts that can be lifted by a few people, anybody can prefab it. So you keep it small, keep it simple, and keep it light and local. And the complex rooms and the simple rooms, the panels and the modules that make these up, using a file format that prefabbers understand or that machines understand and that spit out shop drawings are the hallmark of prefabbers. They're all using the same file types. The IFC is usually the type of that's most popular. But when you think about designing like this, it starts to turn buildings from houses into products. And we go from housing designers or building designers to product designers. And you start to think about how to decouple the envelope, which is really sacrosanct to the passive house piece and to the longevity of the building, and decouple all the systems and all the parts and pieces from that envelope so they can be swapped out over time. So you're increasing the longevity and you're increasing the resilience of the building. So on the left is a great picture of Blueprint Robotics and Nick Panetta, who is rocking it at that incredible machine, highly skilled as he is. He is very different from the person whose gender we will not name on the right. That could be a girl, right? In their office doing their fine craftsmanship, building the cabinets, building the details that are fiercely place-based right up the road from the project site. And either of them can build the components. Either of them can build the panels. So why not design in a way that you can do it either way? And then you can choose. So the material shortages and shutdowns, you're all very familiar with these, the material prices going up and the reports of how many contractors are facing a material shortage. This is something that prefab, even at the local level, can help manage as well, because now you can stockpile your materials and you can minimize your schedule delays and minimize your project shutdowns, because you don't have to deliver the materials when you need them on site and worry about that tight sequencing that happens when you're only on site. And then the workforce shortages. Let's talk about the skilled workforce piece, because this is the part that doesn't matter how many designers we have. If we can't build them, we're busted, right? So the workforce shortage in 2022 was 650,000. And with millions looking for work, the stigma on the trades is still real. So when we think about are skilled trades. And when I think about the skilled trades in my area, the ones that taught me how to draw better before I even got into Passive House, they are all retiring, and they have an incredible wealth of knowledge, and they have institutional knowledge that we're going to lose if we don't pass it on to our next generation. So I like to think about it like a forest. So on the left is a healthy forest. It's got a healthy understory, and that is the next generation of trees. If we have too much of one population, or too much clearing, or too much exclusivity and not enough diversity, we have a forest like we see on the right, which has no understory at all. And that means we're going to lose that forest. Its days are numbered. So when you rethink prefab and you think about it for the first time and you go to put it into your workflow, consider what you know, what you think you know, what you know, and what you just don't know. And then remind yourself of what people say instead of rethinking, because you'll certainly come up against all of those phrases. This is from Adam Grant's Think Again, which is a great book. And I repurposed this into the most encouraging things people ask when they're rethinking. What will work here? What experience will we need? How can we rethink it simply? And in what ways will our community do it better? So the other last piece that we'll go through with carbon when thinking about this is the time value of carbon. We have very little time in which to address that A1 through A3, that embodied carbon, and specify our products in a way that's going to make the difference when we need it, which is now. And so I am back to another proverb, which this time is from Africa. If you want to go quickly, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. But let's do both. We need to do both. So just like that free dance image in the beginning, however you practice this. And here's some good, healthy reading for you all. I also just got hot off the presses Greta Thunberg's climate book. I had to order it from England because it's not out in the States right now, but you can add that to the list as well. And don't forget your guidebook. And thank you so much for having me. I have no idea if I'm over time or not, but I'm guessing I am.